I want you to hit me as hard as you can.
Movies as we know it changed on May 25th, 1977. That was the day Star Wars came out, and films have never been the same. But what exactly was the secret recipe that added up to what's become perhaps the most iconic film franchise ever made? The mixture of sci-fi and fantasy was something every studio was keen to adopt. Sometimes the results were great. I'd wager Alien wouldn't exist without Star Wars, and even movies like Battle Beyond the Stars, Star Trek the Motion Picture, The Black Hole, and the James Bond film Moonraker copied the formula with a reasonable amount of success. But sometimes the results were horrendous, such as the Mystery Science Theater 3000-worthy Star Crash. And by the time we reached the 80s, there were some ultra-pricey sci-fi flops sprinkled in between the bargain basement sci-fi movies we were getting, like Space Hunter: Adventures in the Forbidden Zone.
You said if I made it through, I'm free!
I lied.
One of the biggest flops of the 80s was no doubt Columbia Pictures' sci-fi fantasy Krull, which was kinda like Star Wars meets Conan the Barbarian or Dungeons & Dragons. Costing around $30 million, not too far off from what Return of the Jedi cost, Krull only made a measly $16.9 million at the box office and was roundly mocked. But in the years since, it's earned a special place in the heart of many sci-fi fans, and was enough of a cult hit that it even got name-dropped in the Pineapple Express as the movie James Franco has on his TV in the background while selling weed to Seth Rogen. To be sure, Krull is one weird movie. For one thing, why was Peter Yates, the director of the Steve McQueen flick Bullet and The Hot Rock, chosen to direct? What in his filmography ever showed that he was adept at sci-fi? Perhaps it was the fact that he'd had more than his share of hits, including The Deep, although given that it starred Jacqueline Bisset in a wet t-shirt, it's no surprise it was a hit. I mean, come on. But Krull, alas, did not have any wet t-shirts. No. But it did have giant spiders, a really cool Cyclops, and a dazzling score by James Horner. So the elements were all there. A classical sci-fi fantasy Stanford Sherman script tells of a magical planet, the titular Krull, that's invaded by an evil being called the Beast and his army of slayers. Prince Colwyn is about to marry a princess named Lissa from a rival kingdom in order to form an alliance to defeat the Beast, but his wedding is interrupted by a band of slayers who kill his father, steal his bride, and wipe out his army. Thankfully, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Ymir the Old One, is around to help him recruit an army of merry rapscallions to rescue his damsel in distress. Oh yeah, and then there's the Glaive, which is like, I guess, a mystical throwing star that's controlled by, I guess, what, is it the Force? I mean,
Use the Force, Luke.
it seems like it's the Force. I mean, they don't call it the Force, but I mean, it's the Force. Now here are some of the problems. The leads in this movie just aren't great. Ken Marshall's Colwyn is way too pure to be a great hero. Clearly designed in the Luke Skywalker mode, he's too virtuous. A Han Solo type, perhaps played by his scene-stealing co-star Liam Neeson, would have been a lot more effective. Marshall was getting a star build-up after his turn as Marco Polo in a well-received miniseries, but this ended his career as a lead, which was unfair as no one could have really made the character interesting. The same goes for Lysette Anthony, who doesn't even get to use her own voice as the remarkably passive Lyssa.
My father says that good fighters make bad husbands.
She was revoiced by Lindsay Krause, an American, because the studio figured American audiences wouldn't approve of an English girl in the lead. And also, is it just me or is the planet Krull almost empty? The movie has basically no extras. Has the Beast killed everyone? And then the Glaive, while cool, is used only briefly and at the end. Our own Jason Adams, in his column Awfully Good, compared the Glaive to the lightsaber and put it this way. Imagine if Obi-Wan had shown Luke a lightsaber the first time we see them together on Tatooine and kept hyping it up without ever letting him actually turn it on. But then at the end, Luke uses it one time in battle and realizes that he doesn't need it, and that the real weapon was always the friendships that he made along the way. And also, I have to say, the Beast himself looks real lame, although the Slayers are kinda cool looking and their death scenes are pretty gruesome for a family movie. However, in my mind, the good from Krull far outweighs the bad. For one thing, I like the merry outlaws Colwyn recruits, especially Alan Armstrong as Torquil the leader and Liam Neeson as the gang's Lothario Keegan. and also look out for a young and likewise dubbed Robbie Coltrane. I also really dug the heroic Cyclops Rel, who's cursed with knowing the time of his death and fights with the advantage that until his time comes, he can't be killed. And while the comic relief is laid on a little thick, I kinda like Ergo the Magnificent, who keeps transforming himself into animals, and his chemistry with the Cyclops. Freddie Jones, the father of actor Toby Jones, also makes for a very good Obi-Wan Kenobi substitute, and he has the movie's most memorable scene as he navigates a spider's web to basically chat with his crazy ex-wife, the Widow of the Web. And of course, the score by the late James Horner is incredible, so good in fact that parts of the score would wind up being reused in a lot of his other scores, including The Mask of Zorro. When all is said and done, Krull is no masterpiece, but it's a deeply silly slice of 80s nostalgia that goes down real easy. I've always enjoyed revisiting it, and it holds up surprisingly well. So, if you watch too much Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings, give it a look and enjoy pretty much the closest 80s kids got to those movies. Until next time, for JOBLO Videos, I'm Chris Bumbray.
JOBLO